Hamburgers may be quintessentially American, but there is a Cuban version known as a frita, for those of you who may not have tried one. The Fritas patty includes a mix of beef and pork, and it's heavily spiced with garlic, cumin, and paprika. It's of course served on Cuban bread because a standard burger bun simply won't do, and it's topped with shoestring potatoes, smoky ketchup, and some slivers of raw onion. Let's make one, shall we? I'm going to start by making the traditional frita that was first popularized in Miami by its plentiful Cuban immigrant population before moving on to a more modern concoction of my own. We'll start with our meat, which I'm going to grind myself, partly because it tastes better and partly because I really want to try out my new grinder that I got a deal on. Most fritas incorporate pork into the patty by way of chorizo, which is a pork-based sausage. There are two different types of chorizo, Spanish and Mexican style. Spanish chorizo is already cooked, since it is cured, smoked, and tied into links. It's got a slight kick to it, but it tastes predominantly of garlic and smoked paprika. Mexican-style chorizo, on the other hand, is made of loose, ground, raw pork. It has the same reddish tint, but features garlic, cumin, and chili pepper more heavily, since paprika was historically expensive to import. Despite our ties to the same mother country, thanks to colonialism, Spanish chorizo is the one that's more common in Cuban dishes, compared to its Mexican counterpart. What I'm looking for in my burger blend is about an 80-20 ratio of lean meat to fat. If you're buying pre-ground meat, look for this percentage or maybe even slightly leaner. Keep in mind that you'll be adding chorizo, which, as a sausage, will inherently have a higher fat content than other cuts of meat. If you're grinding it up yourself like I am, I'm using a 2-to-1-to-1 ratio of chuck to sirloin to chorizo. Chuck and sirloin are both great choices for burger meat because of their fat content and their rich, meaty flavor. We want beef that's going to stand up to the strongly flavored pork here. I used a cut and portion chuck roast here, as you've already seen, which was easy enough to cut into cubes to grind. For my sirloin meat, however, I'm using a large subprimal cut, the top sirloin butt. Breaking it down taught me that I'm not quite the butcher that my grandfather was, and that my knives desperately need sharpening, but I did get some nice picañas out of the experience. The most important thing when grinding meat is that you keep everything very cold. I'm throwing my grinder and my bowl into the freezer before seasoning my beef. Cut your beef into cubes and trim the casing off your chorizo as well before giving it a rough chop. The beef will get tossed with some roasted garlic along with some smoked paprika and cumin seeds. To boost their flavor, I'm dry toasting them in a hot pan, swirling constantly for about 30 seconds until fragrant before crushing in a mortar and pestle. These will get added in while it's grinding. I'm very deliberately reserving the salt and pepper for the end though, as this will improve the texture of the meat. After all, it's a burger, not meatloaf. Toss your cubes in the freezer for at least 30 minutes, so it can firm up around the edges. Much as I felt at my first high school dance, I'm now ready to grind. I'm throwing this through the coarsest plate first, before grinding it all one more time through a finer one. The double grind will yield more tender results, and will better incorporate the seasonings and the fat. Between grinds, add a tablespoon of roasted garlic, along with a teaspoon of smoked paprika and your ground toasted cumin seeds. The finer grind will work these in, eliminating the need to mix by hand again, and thus overwork your meat. Which is also a lesson I probably should have learned in high school. Once your meat is ready, form into patties. I'm going to take about 1/3 of a pound here, which will shrink down as it cooks. Some people may take pride in forming their burgers by hand, but considering my crippling sense of perfectionism, I'm not one of those people. I'm using my distinctly janky set of ring molds here that I've fashioned by cutting up an old deli container. Feel free to form your burgers as your own neuroticism will allow though. With the patties ready, we need to make sure they're appropriately dressed. While you can certainly use plain old ketchup, fritas often have ketchup that's been spiced and doctored up for more flavor. I'm using about a cup of it here, specifically Heinz brand, because I lived in Pittsburgh for several years and I won't be gaslit into thinking that Hunt's or any other brand tastes the same. I'm combining the ketchup with about a tablespoon of vinegar and roasted garlic, as well as a teaspoon each of ground cumin, more smoked paprika, oregano, and hot sauce. Adjust the salt if needed, and hit it with a drop or two of liquid smoke if you're like me and want it to taste like a campfire. And speaking of fire, it's time to introduce our burgers to the heat. I'm retrieving them from the fridge and seasoning with salt and black pepper. This is going in a lightly oiled cast iron pan over medium-high heat, but if you want to break out the grill for these, that wouldn't be a bad idea. Flip when ready, cooking to medium-ish or your preferred doneness. This is going between awaiting slices of lightly warmed Cuban bread. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, the inside of this bread is pillowy soft, with a thin and crispy exterior. And if that doesn't sell you, then allow me to also inform you that it's baked with lard, so what more could you want? There is exactly one single Cuban bakery here in New Orleans, so you better believe that I made the trek. And as someone who's lived in places like New Jersey and Miami that have a robust Cuban population, I am pleased to report that Norma's bread, if she did in fact personally bake this herself, is up to par. I'm topping my burger with a squirt of that smoky ketchup, as well as some potato sticks and some chopped raw onion. This isn't really a burger suited for a sexy cross-section though, and I haven't really eaten all day, so I'm gonna dig right in. And you should too. Enjoy! The chorizo, the spices, the ketchup. This is everything you know about a burger amped up to 11 and imbued with the flavors of the Caribbean. The bread soaks up the juices like a blank canvas, and the onion and the potato sticks give you that bit of crunch that you need. This isn't a sandwich that necessarily needs improving, but for my tastes, I'm going to modernize it as a Cuban slider and prepare it like a smash burger. We have our meat and we have our ketchup, so let's jump straight to burger preparation. I'm going to roll some of the meat into a slightly smaller portion this time, a little less than a quarter pound each. I'm throwing 2 of these down onto a lightly oiled griddle before pressing them down firmly and smearing as if it were spackle. I realize that none of that sounded appetizing though, so maybe we lay off the hardware store metaphors. Let's get back to food, seasoning with salt and black pepper before sprinkling with an ungodly amount of thinly sliced onions. Let it cook most of the way through, before flipping and seasoning the other side. This treatment is going to sear most of the onions into your meat. Don't worry if they get everywhere though, they'll get scraped in between the buns all the same. We won't have any fallen soldiers on this battleground. We're topping with a slice of American cheese, because even if you despise processed food, there's nothing that melts better than those bright orange singles. Throw some potato buns right on top to let them warm up as they absorb the onion vapor. These thin burgers won't take long to finish though. Another 30 seconds to a minute is all you need before you're ready to assemble your sliders. As you can see, I have cheese soldered to both of my buns, so the toppings have no other choice but to go in the middle. Squirt some ketchup onto your burger as a bed to lay down your potato sticks and any onion detritus you've accumulated on the griddle. Could I have fried my own shoestring potatoes? Sure, but the stuff from the can reminds me of snacking by the fistful at my grandparents' house before that first frita was ready, and nostalgia tastes sweet. Anyone who wants to stand on tradition is welcome to do so, but these unapologetically bring 2 of my favorite burgers together, the Cuban Frita and the North Jersey Slider. These are basically an ethnic version of White Manna in Hackensack, New Jersey, one of my favorite spots growing up. The meat here is rich. Each bite has got spice to illuminate your taste buds, and the ketchup is smoky enough to make it seem as if it were grilled over charcoal. The surplus of onions we used means that you get unique textures throughout as they cook differently. Some are soft and sweet, and some are crispy right at those edges. The potato sticks absorb some of the juices from the top patty while still retaining their crunch. And the potato bun is the perfect foundation to absorb each flavor before it spills onto your fingertips, though you can't go wrong with using Cuban bread again here. All this just goes to show that modernizing the classics isn't always a bad thing, but there are some juices that the potato bun missed, so don't mind me if I lick my fingertips clean.